If you've ever wondered, how do I take two people in two locations and put them together where it looks like they're in the same room, you've come to the right place. I'm going to break down every single thing we did to create a two-person interview with maybe one of the world's longest over-the-shoulder shots at over 9,000 miles away. Let me show you what's happening here. We just finished a video where Ryan is sitting in his studio in Australia. I'm sitting in our studio in Chattanooga, Tennessee, and we created these 5 different shots that you see here. A wide shot where it looks like he and I are totally sitting next to each other, and we've kind of seen that done before, but I'm going to show you some really cool secrets because we did it in 4K. But also, in addition to that, there's 2 over-the-shoulder shots that you see here, and I've never seen anyone do an over-the-shoulder shot all composited in real time. And then finally, there's 2 shots on the bottom there that are moving shots using a moving slider, also all coordinated in real time. I'm going to break down every single part of how we pulled this off. And it all starts with camera placement. So in this diagram, Ryan had a cool 8-bit version of himself on his YouTube channel, so I decided to add one of me as well. And I wanted to just kind of quickly show you how we've set this up. So everything that's in red is here in the Socially Used studio in Chattanooga, Tennessee, and everything that's in green is in Ryan's studio with Tiny Giants in Sydney, Australia. So let's first of all look at the layout of the room. I'm sitting on this red couch, so red is here in the United States. Also, I have a rug underneath me. I kind of made it slightly red. And then you'll see this green coffee table and Ryan in green, okay? So he's sitting in a chair and he has a coffee table. So that's the layers. There's the carpet here in Chattanooga and me sitting on a couch, and then Ryan in his chair and coffee table. And then you can see this different shots that we have set up. And so this red over the shoulder shot that you see here, it's just filming me. It's just filming me blurry right here, and a big green space opened up for where Ryan's gonna go. And then Ryan has this close-up shot that we're gonna be able to use for that over-the-shoulder shot. And so we'll composite those 2 together to make it look like it's Andre. His shoulder is blurry, and then Ryan is fully in focus. And then you'll see we have 2 wide shots. For graphical purposes, I put them side by side, but of course, they're just shooting all at exactly the same height, at the same angle, at the same focal length. Everything is exactly the same on these 2 cameras. They're perfectly aligned, not next to each other, but they would be right on top of each other. And then we're just repeating that over here on this other side with the over-the-shoulder and the close-up. So this over-the-shoulder shot that's in Australia is just shooting Ryan being a little blurry. And then this close-up is showing me, and I'm actually in focus for the shot, and we're gonna composite those together. And then both in Chattanooga and in Australia, we have these Axibo moving shots, and these shots are moving on a slider back and forth, communicating in real time to Unreal Engine, rendering and creating the background. So what does this ultimately look like? Well, we can see this shot of Ryan over the shoulder, and he's blurry and then green, and then that's where I'm going to be, right? So we're gonna put me in that, and we're gonna composite those 2 together into one shot. I'm gonna show you exactly how we did that. Here's just a quick picture of the actual layout of the room. We folded the carpet back in the back because it just looked a little weird sticking out, and we had that coffee table in front of it. And then here's Ryan's 4 shots in green that he had, and I'll show you exactly what he ended up sending to us and how we were able to take that and put things together. Now, this is our physical setup of the studio here. Here's kind of a rough picture of that. And then here's his physical setup of what he had there. So see, I've got the carpet underneath me in the chair, and then he's got the coffee table and himself sitting there. So Ryan and I are communicating to each other over Zoom. And so he's got this confidence monitor. He's looking at me with Zoom and hearing me over Zoom because it's very low latency. But Zoom is not actually what we use because we were doing all of this in 4K. And to tell you more about exactly how we did this part, I'm going to turn this over to Morgan.
So some of the reasons for not using Zoom for something like this is that it's going to prioritize audio over the video. What that means is it's going to have the lowest audio latency to enable real-time conversations to be happening. That was super helpful for us to be able to have that real-time communication, but it comes at a cost. It's gonna vary the video bitrate, which is not going to be great for visual quality and especially for keying the remote green screen. We also wanted to do this all in 4K because that's our workflow here. Zoom currently does not support a 4K workflow. That meant we needed to turn to a different solution. That solution ended up being SRT. It allowed us to do 4K at H.265 encoding. It had controllable latency and packet loss recovery. And because we were traveling over 9,000 miles across the public internet to pull this off, we figured we were going to have some packet loss along the way. So having a way to recover from that was super important. To decode 4K SRT feeds, you're going to need some hardware. For us, we were using our Unreal computers, which gave us the ability to use the NVIDIA RTX A6000. This video card has 48 gigabytes of RAM and, more importantly, hardware decode options for H.265, which is what we were using to encode the SRT feed. We ended up using Vmix Beta 27 at the time for this because it was the only software that would support 4K external outputs via a decklink card. So in this use case, we were taking the 4K SRT feeds in and just simply outputting them to our switcher and our Ultimates via a decklink card. You may have watched some television like news and noticed like sometimes they'll toss to the reporter and there'll be like an awkward delay or pause. Well, we didn't want that to be the case for our setup here, so we ended up needing a way to calculate that. So because SRT lets us set the delay, we typed in the number of 2 seconds. We ended up on that number because that gave us the most amount of time to recover from a packet problem so that our quality didn't degrade, and gave us the lowest amount of latency that we could find. To make sure that we were at the 2-second delay, we ended up using syncer.live. This website allowed us to pull up a clock on both sides. So here we had a clock pulled up on a laptop, and over on the remote side, they had a laptop with this same web page pulled up. Then we simply recorded a short video or took a photo and calculated the time difference between the two shots. As a result, we confirmed that we were at the 2-second delay, which is what we thought we had. You may be wondering, if they're at a 2-second delay, to line up the conversation over here, that meant we needed to delay our cameras by 2 seconds. So how would we do that? Well, we would use a second Vmix instance, again, the Beta 27, a second decklink card, and simply pass our cameras into that Vmix instance. Vmix has the ability to do a per input delay. So if you look here, inside the input setting, you can go up to here and add a delay in frames. For us, because we were filming in 30 frames a second, that meant we needed to do a 60 frame delay. That's gonna allocate some of your system memory to handle that delay. Now, that's gonna be per input. So for here, you'll see 949 megabytes times the 4 inputs that we have. We ended up having plenty of system RAM to handle all of this. Next, you're gonna configure your external outputs. So you'll go down here, hit the little gear icon, and that's gonna bring you into this menu. On this menu, you'll see that we have our 4 external outputs up at the top, and this lets us set our frame rate and our resolution per each of the outputs. Because we're adding the delay to our cameras and our audio is inserted later down our particular video chain, we're using Waves LV1's delay plugin to delay our audio to bring it back in sync with everything. Most modern day audio consoles have a way to delay the audio. This will vary based on your setup. To go in more detail about the wiring, I'm gonna hand it back over to Andre.
Thanks, Morgan. And now I want to show you the wiring diagram of everything it took to wire all this up. Let's start with the wide shot. Here on the wide shot, you can see that I've got our camera here at Socially You, that's going through that Vmix to get that internal delay of 2 seconds, and that's getting pushed into what I'm going to call Ultimatte B. And then here below that, you'll see that we're receiving over SRT this 4K signal from Ryan, and that's going into a different Ultimatte that I'm just going to say is Ultimatte A. Ultimatte A is then pushing out of matte and fill, and those are going into the layer matte and the layer inputs of the Ultimatte. Remember, when things are being pushed out and put on the layer, they're being put layered on top. So now Ryan and the coffee table are on top, so my feet look like they're behind the coffee table. Those two ultimately get composited together into the final shot. And we're doing that because Ryan's green and my green are going to be very different. And so I want to make sure that I'm able to go in and composite him totally separately from the composite I do for me. And then I'm using the Ultimatte to just push the two together. So now let's look at the over the shoulder shot. In this shot, I'm blurry and out of focus and over the shoulder. So let's look at how we did that. We started by taking Ryan's main shot that he has, and we're shooting that into an Ultimatte. And then you'll notice underneath that is a second Ultimatte. And then there's the ATEM Constellation that we're using over here. Now, the reason we did it this way is it was easier for us to send these wires over into the ATEM because of where this was positioned in the rack than it was to send these up into this other Ultimatte. But I want to keep this here so that you can see the two different ways you could accomplish this task. So in the USA camera, we're running it through that delay. I'm running it through our Ultimatte to key it out. And then I'm supplying matte and fill to the ATEM in key and fill and indicating that this is a pre-multiplied key. And then I'm using the Constellation, one of its MEs, in this case ME3, to composite those two together in this upstream key, a Luma key, so that we ultimately get this over-the-shoulder shot. And you know what? It's very similar to the second shot that you see here. It's the same, basically the same thing, just in reverse, right? So I've got our camera here. That camera is going into a delay. That delay is then being fed into the Ultimatte, and that's set up on that ME, in this case ME4. And then down here you can see below, now Australia is being fed in. So just remember, whatever you want on top, that's what's going to be outputted and then inputted into a layer in, whether that's the Ultimatte layer in or the ATEM key and fill layer in. Those are always the things that sit on top, because I need him on top, like my hand that just gestured in front of his face. It needs to be on top so we see that happen that way. So that helps sell the illusion of how this works. Now we also had two remaining shots, and they're both around a slider shot. And we accomplished this because we're using Unreal Engine to create the environment that we're in. Remember, we're doing all of this in real time. And then we're using a slider from a company called Axibo, and Axibo is sending out the X, Y, and Z coordinates of where it is positionally over to the Unreal Engine machine. And this allows us to just have a very simple, we've added a delay just to get everything in sync, and then we're just keying it out, and our Unreal Engine is doing the rest of the work. But that brings us to Ryan's shot. So in order for Ryan to be able to pull this off, he's compositing himself locally. So this Ultimatte is the only Ultimatte that's actually not in Chattanooga at the Social U studio. This is happening locally in Ryan's studio in Australia. So he's able to go in and take this feed, run it through his Ultimatte and his Unreal computer, merge those together, and send us this final shot. And because both of these moving shots don't have the other person on screen, we're able to send them independently. So this is entirely being rendered on Ryan's end. But to tell you more about how we've set up Unreal, I'm going to toss this back over to Morgan.
Let's talk about Unreal Engine. Now, Unreal Engine can be super complex, so I'm going to keep it kind of simple here and just talk about how we shared the project remotely and keep all of our changes in sync. Now, as you saw in the wiring diagram, they were keying their Axibo shot on their end. That meant that they needed to have a copy of the Unreal project and also have any changes that we make populate across. So that meant we needed to sync the projects. Now, to do that, you're going to need a couple things. You're going to first want to make sure you're on the same Unreal Engine version. For us, that was 5.2 that we were utilizing for this. The project files need to be the same across all the computers. That's any textures, any 3D objects, anything like that. You want to make sure you have all that synchronized and that they're all named the same and in the same location. Network-wise, you want to use a VPN or port forward for the multi-user server on your router. Again, the Unreal documentation can kind of tell you a little bit more about what specific ports need to be opened and forwarded. Now, you're going to open up Switchboard, and in here you'll start a server, and you'll see that it's now keeping track of all changes as they happen in real time, and everybody can see the changes in their project on their local machine. Now we're going to talk more about the Ultimatte settings, and for that I'm going to hand that back over to Andre.
Now I want to show you a few Ultimatte settings that are not very obvious, but to get started, I did want to just show you the back of two Ultimattes. Both of these Ultimattes are in Chattanooga in our studio, but I want to show the feed that's coming from Ryan that I've kind of outlined here in white. That is going to be fed into the other Ultimatte in Chattanooga that's going to composite these two together. And the way we're doing that, I just wanted you to see the back of the unit on this one. We're coming from the fill output and we're going over into the layer in. And then similarly, we're taking the mat output and we're moving that over into the layer mat in. Okay, so those are the actual wirings you're doing to make sure that Ryan appears on top of the screen, but we don't stop there. So in order to get this actually on top, there's a few more things we have to do, and it starts by choosing the mat in selection from the Ultimatte software control panel. After you do that, you want to select layer mat settings, okay? It's a little button that's right here. And then after you do that, you're going to turn on LY layer, LY input, the LM, the layer mat invert, and you want to turn on LY in linear. All three of these things must be turned on, but wait, there's more. And in order to get to the next part, you're gonna have to press mat in again, okay? That's gonna kind of restart this menu, and then from there, you're going to select LY in FGBG, because that's obvious, right? The layer in on the foreground background, and this is the last step that puts the layer mat composite on top of the foreground, okay? So those are the settings you're gonna need to have on that. And then if you end up, instead of using the two Ultimattes where one's feeding into the other like I just showed you, and instead you wanna feed that into the ATEM, here's what you're gonna do. You're gonna click on settings, and then from there, you're gonna choose outputs, and inside that, you're gonna choose mat out invert, okay? After you have that selected, then inside your upstream key, you're just gonna make sure pre-multiplied key is selected. Okay, so that's a bunch of different settings that were hard for us to kind of work through and find, so hopefully that'll save you a little time navigating through that on the Ultimatte. I wanted to end with just some lessons learned that we've had, or maybe some bonus material that we've had out of this. So to kind of summarize everything we were up to, we had 9 4K Ultimattes involved, 1 in Australia doing the compositing locally, and 8 here in Chattanooga at Social EU. We were running 8 cameras to pull that off, 4 in each location. We had 5 Unreal engines in 2 locations. We had 4 streams of 4K, all doing that SRT over Vmix. And then we had 3 instances of Vmix. Australia had theirs pushing the 4 signals to us. And then of course we had the 2 in the US that Morgan mentioned earlier. We had 2 sliders using Axibo, and we were pushing an audio delay both through Vmix and, in our case, the Waves eMotion LV1. A bunch of different things. One key lesson we had to learn, though, is Control Room had to live in the past. So they're 2 seconds behind anything I was saying. So if I asked them to do something or whatever, it was like a really long beat before we heard back from them. So that was just kind of an interesting, like, oh, right, I've got to be a little patient and think about that and give it a little extra time for Control Room to hear, because Control Room can only hear the final mix in order to cut it all together. That was an interesting thing to kind of work through the dynamics of that. Another thing I wanted to show, Ryan had kind of a pretty large earpiece, and I feel like in some ways that kind of diminished the illusion we were going for. We've been using these MEE audios. I don't have the Pro that disconnects that I'm showing in this picture here, but we have the ones that just go over the ear, like you see here. And so we just have that pushed in over the ear, and it's super, super faint. It's basically, you're gonna see like a little line right here, if anything. And we even took that and coated it in a little makeup, and it's pretty unnoticeable. So I really like these. They're pretty inexpensive, and they did a great job for us. Another thing I wanted to mention is getting the remote wide shot, just getting the best key I possibly could. We're using Chromalight paint here. He's using a different paint right now, and so he was getting a lot more spill on him. So in order to help do that, I got him to clear off the coffee table and his chair, and we shot what's called a clean plate. And these are the 3 steps you do to do that. Right here is you just screen capture, say yes, and then click screen correct. Those 3 settings that you'll do underneath Matt let you get that clean plate. Essentially, it's taking a picture of the green and it's using that picture to then decide how it's going to, what it's going to cut out. And so doing that really helped us get a more substantive key than we otherwise would have been able to get. Another issue we had is delay. So Ultimates in our world are always delayed about 6 frames, and that's just to do with us kind of syncing that up with Unreal Engine to make sure everything's perfectly synchronized. By the time our little chain goes through it, it takes about 6 frames of delay. So we turned off the delay on almost all the Ultimates when we did this interview. We forgot to do it on the wide shot. So if you go and watch on our channel the interview, you'll notice on the wide shot the audio is a little out of sync. We just missed it when we were doing the record. So I'm telling you, don't forget to change your delay, and then of course, don't forget to change it back after you're done with this. Now, as far as just a couple of summary key points, this took 2 green screen studios. And whoever has the smaller studio wins when it comes to camera placement, because they have the limitations of how far back you can put the wide shot. It's most important to get that wide shot right. So we've got to get that exactly lined up, and that smaller space is going to determine just how far away you can get the wide shot set up. Don't forget to measure the camera exactly, including the height, the distance, the angle, the focal length, even the f-stop. We want to just try to make it as close to the same as we possibly can. And then if there is something you can put on the floor that you both have to put down to kind of just make sure it all looks correctly and is lined up well, that's great. We love a square. So we use Westcott frames for a lot of stuff, scrim gems. And so we just took a Westcott frame, put that down, and we're able to use that to line things up. At some point, we didn't have that ready, and so we both had an AirPod case, and so we put the AirPod case down and kind of lined it up with that. So use what you've got, but try to use something the same to make sure you've got all the perspectives just right. That coffee table looks just a little weird, but I think the coffee table is just actually bent a little bit, and that's what's causing that little bit of extra kind of lean that it has in it. But this is critical to get right. And then just a little point that I had there is make sure the presentation needs to be delayed. We were doing some things where I was annotating and I was going through and kind of doing some things like this and annotating on the screen, but it wasn't delayed. So it was 2 seconds in the future. So by the time I was saying, okay, I'm done with that, and now I'm doing this thing, it was just talking about the first thing. So just make sure everything is delayed, not just the video, whatever you're gonna show, make sure all of it is delayed. So it's a ton of stuff, isn't it? Thanks for watching this long, all through this. We've done everything we can to action pack every second in this video because your time's invaluable. And we just wanna make sure we did a good job of showing you everything. If we left something out or if you got a question, of course, let us know. And hey, listen, I'm looking for other studios that are green screen and have multi-camera so we could try this with other studios. Maybe let's do a series of interviews. So if you've got a studio and you'd be interested in doing an interview like this, I'd love to do one with you so that we can just continue to figure out what other things can we do to make this better. And not only that, I think we could create a network of studios that allow us to say like, hey, no problem. You're in Australia and we're here in Chattanooga. We can put the 2 people together without having to fly someone all the way over. So let's expand that. And hey, maybe we'll even do an interview with 3 people in 3 different locations where it looks like they're all sitting in the same room. So if any of that's interesting to you, please reach out to us. studio@sociallyu is always a great way to reach out, or leave a comment down below. I cannot wait to see what happens with everyone getting this, kind of understanding what it takes to do this, and then taking this to the next level. If there's something we did wrong, please help us see how we could do it better. We're always looking to improve. I've shared all my secrets, so if you've got some, please let us know them as well. Let's all grow together and make all of our studios better.